Well, it's great to be here. I want to make this as valuable to all of you as possible, and so I want to, leave plenty of time for questions. Feel free to, ask any, and I'm happy to help in any way I can, give you a better sense for what's happening within Silicon Slopes, within Utah's tech community, and all that type of stuff. But I'll start with some opening remarks, and then maybe we could turn it into a bit of a town hall. Does that work? As was mentioned, I'm Clint Betts. I'm the Executive Director of Silicon Slopes. We also recently took over the Utah Technology Council, which will allow us to get involved in some public policy advocacy and maybe even some lobbying work, although I don't know, it's not really my personality, so we'll see how that goes. Here's what Silicon Slopes is. Silicon Slopes is two things. One, it's like it's the term we use to talk about Utah's tech community. And there's also an organization behind it. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is to empower Utah's startup and tech community to learn, connect, and serve in order to make entrepreneurship and opportunity open and accessible to all within Utah. And so what does that mean? All of that's a lot of buzzwords, a lot of different things were just said there. I'll go a little bit deeper on the Learn, Connect, Serve mission. On the Learn piece, we're primarily a media company. So we're telling the story of what's happening in Utah's startup and tech community, both within the state and to the rest of the world. On the Connect piece, we do over 200 events a year. Silicon Slopes Tech Summit, which happened this January and brought in a little over 26,000 people, is the largest event we do. But we do events, all across the state of Utah. We have a chapter here in St. George. I think this might actually be a Silicon Slopes event that we're at right now. So we do a lot of events, and so that's what we mean by connect, is connecting entrepreneurs and connecting them with, surrounding them with a community of mentors and support. And the serve piece is, it's our responsibility as kind of like the nonprofit and voice of Utah's tech community to rally the community to serve and give back. And we do that in a variety of different ways, education being a big one. At Silicon Slopes Tech Summit this past year, we committed $5 million to getting computer science in every Utah school by 2022. The legislature followed up a few weeks later and committed $3 million of their own, so we feel good about that mission. We're supportive of things like, one of the co-founders of Silicon Slopes is Ryan Smith, who's the CEO of Qualtrics, and he started Five for the Fight. And so we do a lot of work with Five for the Fight and Pluralsight One, because Aaron Sconard, CEO of Pluralsight, is also, one of our co-founders, and on and on and on. Basically, what we mean by serve is we rally the community to kind of serve and give back. So that's us as an organization, and I'm happy to go deeper if you have questions. Some of you may know, a lot of that already. Some of you may have some questions about how we're structured in the Utah Technology Council stuff. But I think it'd probably be more valuable to give you a sense for what's happening within the community overall. Now, 2018, I believe, will go down as the seminal year in Utah tech history. We had 3 tech companies go public in 2018. That's never happened in Utah history. It was Pluralsight, it was Domo, and it was Purple, which is they're a mattress company actually, but we count them as a tech company. And so we had three tech companies go public. Never happened before. That's a fantastic, amazing year in Silicon Valley. Never happened before in Utah history. Type of a year here in our state. And another huge thing that happened was Qualtrics was purchased or acquired by SAP for $8 billion. It's the largest business enterprise tech acquisition, not just in the state, but in the history of the world, right? It's just an enormous, incredible thing. And we now have a new richest person in Utah because of it. And so what's happening, and those are just like the 4 really, really big stories. But in 2018, there's never been more money invested in Utah companies than ever before. There's never been more talent that came to the state of Utah to work inside of tech companies than it ever happened before. Tech now accounts for 1 out of every 7 jobs in the state of Utah. There's over 300,000 people who work in the industry. I actually think that number might be higher, but Kim Gardner Institute said it was a little over 300,000. And just the overall attention and support that entrepreneurs and these companies have received and did receive in 2018 is, again, unprecedented in our history. So things are going pretty well in Silicon Slopes and in the tech community in general. One of the things that we're noticing is starting to happen because of the success that we've had as a community and because of the success stories I just mentioned, challenges come up through that. And I think this is an interesting conversation for St. George to be having, because we just had a meeting with a lot of the top CEOs here in this community right before I came in here. And there was a lot of talk around, well, how do we build what has happened up north in this community? How do we get companies like Domo and Pluralsight and Qualtrics here? And I think this is interesting for you to think about because you're on your way. Number one, you're already on your way. You have some impressive companies that would be impressive anywhere in the world, not just up north, in like Printer Logic and Busy, and so many other like really, really, really unique and fantastic companies that are dedicated to your ecosystem, right? But something to think about, and something that we're thinking about a lot as an organization in a community, is kind of the challenges that come with success, right? I called them crises once on a panel, and somebody called them opportunities. I like opportunities better. Those challenges for us, or opportunities, are housing. Like there's a legitimate housing crisis up north. And we're nothing like Silicon Valley, even though we call ourselves Silicon Slopes. In terms of the way we build companies, in terms of the amount of companies, in terms of our overall population, there's really nothing similar to us when it comes to comparing ourselves to Silicon Valley, except for some of the challenges that have come out of that ecosystem. And one of those is if you don't work in tech in Silicon Valley, you no longer live in Silicon Valley. You've been priced out. There is a class divide that has happened there that is so real and is being felt so painfully that if you lived in San Francisco in 1980, you would not recognize San Francisco today, right? And we are seeing some of that happen here in the state of Utah. We are seeing this class divide happen. All of that success and all those stories that I just mentioned to you, that success is not evenly distributed. It's not like everyone in this room just got a part of that $8 billion acquisition. You know what I mean? And it's not like everyone up north did either, right? That success is not evenly distributed, nor should it be. I mean, I'm not a socialist, but I'm just saying what should be evenly distributed is opportunity. And what we all have to figure out, as entrepreneurs and community leaders and just as, citizens of this state, is how do we avoid some of what's happened in Silicon Valley here in Utah? And a big challenge is going to be around housing. And how do we, keep it affordable for, our employees to live here, our children to live here, and continue to, make Utah great as it's been for. It's the reason why we all live here, right? So housing's a challenge, transportation's a challenge, infrastructure. How do you make sure we're building this ecosystem and community in a way that it's sustainable and long term. I don't know if any of you have been to Lehigh recently. It's where our office is, kind of right in the heart of Thanksgiving Point. I've said this a number of times today, but it's like off-roading, trying to get off of that exit, and really just on the freeway. You're going like 80 miles per hour, and you're like on dirt road. It's crazy, right in the epicenter of everything that's happening. And so kind of poor infrastructure planning maybe that's happened there, and probably a little bit around not anticipating the amount of growth that they would see. But down here, think about infrastructure, and you're going to this growth is happening regardless. And St. George is a strong enough community and has enough interesting entrepreneurs that you're only a few years away from where we are up north anyway. And so be thinking now about these infrastructure challenges and ways that you can help solve and plan for them before they become legitimate crises. Other issues we think a lot about is education. Extending, again, everything is around extending the access to the opportunity that exists in Silicon Slopes to everyone, not just, Provo to Salt Lake City, and not just the Wasatch Front, but to everyone in the state of Utah. And so how do you do that? That's why our mission is to get computer science in every Utah school by 2022, not just the schools of the folks who work at Adobe and will be just fine regardless. And so, education's a big issue for us. Diversity and inclusion is a big issue for a lot of tech ecosystems. It's a major issue for us here in the state of Utah for all sorts of reasons, and on and on and on. And so my message to, I guess, and again, I'm not really sure. I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about and give you a sense for what's happening in Silicon Slopes. But my message to St. George in particular, having had a chapter here for a while now and having spent a decent amount of time here over the past year and a half, is you have a fantastic community here. A fantastic community of entrepreneurs, and you have built some amazing companies. And I would say a couple things on that front. One, I would stop solving for growth's sake. That growth is coming regardless, so you need to be smart about the type of growth you want. I would stop trying to get satellite offices from bigger companies to move here. I would focus on building your own companies. And building the type of companies that produce the type of jobs that all of you want to be here in St. George. Rather than I get asked this question a lot as I go to other places in the state, like how do we get Pluralsight to open a satellite office here? Or how do we get Qualtrics to open a satellite office here? And I just think it's the wrong question. I think a better question, not that they shouldn't, obviously, how great would it be if they did? You know what I mean? But if you look at the trajectory of their companies, they're figuring out how to, break into Asia. They have a $4.5 billion market cap, and they got to, expand in Dublin, where they just opened an office, or they got to expand in London or Europe. You know what I mean? So it's not that they shouldn't open a satellite office here, or that no time and effort should be spent there. Because sure, how great would it be if they did? But how great would it be if they were just started here and they had a commitment to this ecosystem and a belief in it and kept it here like you have already in companies like I mentioned before in Printer Logic and Busy. How do you create more of those? For the long-term health of your community, Silicon Slopes believes if we can foster entrepreneurship in communities like this and foster companies that are like that, then I think St. George is going to be better off. And so I would think about that and the type of companies you want, and how do you create a community around those entrepreneurs and around those companies in order to make them successful, in order to make it sustainable, and in order to keep St. George great in the terms of the way you have it now. And so just be thinking about that as you're building these companies. And Silicon Slopes is here to help. Silicon Slopes is happy to surround all of you with a community of mentors, with support, with access to capital, with access to the network that's been built already. And we're committed to St. George because we think as Utah goes, and as the economy goes, so goes our community, and so goes our industry. And we can no longer just put our heads down and build companies. We have to kind of pop up every once in a while and think about the future of this state and the type of state we want and the type of communities we want to build. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah?
My question on that world thing is, I moved from Bay Area, Irvine, California to live here because I can live anywhere I want to live. why the heck would anybody want to live up in Silicon Slopes? I mean, it's like the things you just mentioned, the construction, all the other things. So I'm 100% with you. Build it where you're at. If I live in Cedar City, I'd build it there. If I live in Milford, I'd build it there. But the thing is the type of work we do now, we don't have to be any specific where anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. St. George actually has a lot of remote work talent, which is another thing that we're finding. But I absolutely agree. I mean, I think, and again, St. George is well beyond this. I think. Sometimes I'm not even sure that people who live here all the time understand what's happening in terms of the companies that are being built, the entrepreneurial spirit that's here, and just the overall talent that exists here. Like, we do not, by any shape or imagination, think of St. George as lesser than what's up there, up north. We think St. George is on a trajectory that's super interesting, and the companies that are being built here are as incredible as any we've ever built. In particular with Printer Logic and some of these others. Yeah?
So, in connection with Dixie State University and the community here in St. George, what did you see happen with the institutions of higher education around Silicon Slopes, and how did they impact that growth? And maybe my question would be for you to say, how did they work with the community and with you? What could we do down here that may be as good or better than what they did in preparing for growth and deciding how we grow in St. George?
Well, I'll say this about the universities. This is probably why there's been so much. It's one of the reasons. It's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why there's been so much success over a number of years, and it's been building up. Is because you have BYU and UVU, which is the largest university in the state, right next to each other, and the talent that comes out of there. And in particular, BYU has produced a lot of entrepreneurs. A lot of those companies that I mentioned about going public last year, their founders came from BYU, and there's a strong commitment there. And and then you obviously have the University of Utah, and there's a lot of interesting companies that have come out of the University of Utah. University of Utah probably has one of the more interesting tech histories of any university in the country, outside of like a Stanford or MIT. Adobe came out of there, Pixar came out of there, Silicon Graphics came out of there. A lot of really impressive companies have come out of the university. And the way we've worked with them is, one, obviously they're feeders of talent. So that makes a lot of sense for why we would engage with them, right? We want to hire their graduates. And two, we've thought about, in the same way we think about ecosystems and communities, we've thought about how do we foster entrepreneurship on campus and empower students to learn, connect, and serve, so that they're ready once they come out. And so all of these, we do like lecture series. We're on campus all the time. We're sending our successful CEOs. At UVU, we even teach a class. We have an MBA, a Silicon Slopes MBA program with UVU. We're announcing something similar with Weber State. And so that's how we work with them, and that's how they've supported us. All the presidents of the university are involved in our various organizations and things like that. And so they just show up, and we show up. And that's another thing that I would think about. Like, again, like you have a super interesting community here. And so I don't want to get preachy by any means, but lock arms when you can, right? Don't think you're just siloed. I would tell each other stories as often as you can, right? I think that's where real community happens, is when you're lifting each other up. And that's how we treat every relationship, but in particular with the universities. Any other questions?
Be a little selfish. So I saw Clint at a couple of different meetings. He spoke to students today about his own personal story and with Beehive and how that came about.
Yeah.
Can you maybe talk about that and kind of what you told the students, like the idea of when you're getting started and how that's a little bit of freedom kind of in that phase, and probably enjoy hearing that.
Yeah. So sure, I'm happy to talk about that. I started a software development firm with a couple of buddies of mine. We were working in Provo, Utah. We were working with early stage entrepreneurs to help them build their initial product, or MVP as it's called in the startup world. We'd help them take it to local investors, either angel investors or venture capital firms, and then get a little bit of money and then transition the product, build the product to a point where they could transition to an in-house team. And as we were doing that, we noticed that no one was covering Utah startup and tech community from like a journalistic perspective. I went to UVU, I got a journalism degree. I wouldn't recommend going to UVU and getting a journalism degree, but I did. And the whole reason why I went to school is just to learn how to write, which is something I told the students earlier today. And so I thought, like, well, I'll just start this thing. I'll start telling the stories of what's happening within Utah's tech community and just see what happens. And so I bought a domain called Beehive Startups. I put no thought at all into the name. I bought the domain for $10, and I just started calling up entrepreneurs and saying, hey, I want to tell your story, and writing these stories. And we put Google Analytics on the website to kind of see the type of traffic that we were getting in those early days. And this touches on your point that within 2 months of looking at Google Analytics and how few people were reading our stories, we took Google Analytics off the website because it was depressing. And I still like vividly remember when we were like, yeah, let's I don't even want to look at this anymore in terms of the number of people who were reading it. Like, let's just get rid of it. And my message around that to the students this morning was like, there is some real, like, entrepreneurship is really lonely. It's really hard. You're siloed and no one cares. Right? The entrepreneurs in the room are all shaking their head. Like, and when I say no one cares, like, of course, like, the rest of the world doesn't care. I'm talking like your family doesn't care. Right? I'm talking about like your friends don't care. Right? They're like, what was that you're working on again? Anyways, let me tell you what I did last weekend. You know what I mean? Like, no one cares. And oftentimes, and I'm speaking from experience here, as entrepreneurs, we let that get to us, and we try to do everything we can. Yeah, go ahead.
They don't care unless you can do something for them. It's usually through.
Yeah, if you can help them out. Yeah, that's exactly right. But oftentimes we like let that loneliness, and we let that fact that no one cared. Like when I was doing BI Startups, my wife probably couldn't tell you what I do right now today. But in particular, back then, she couldn't have told you what I did. There's no way. She was like, yeah, he's doing this thing. Hopefully he snaps out of it. She certainly was not like, oh, this is going to be awesome, right? And so as entrepreneurs, there's like this, we feel like this need to like, all right, we got to build something to where people care, right? And you do. I mean, there's kind of two options. You build something of value or you fail, right? Those are the two things that happen within entrepreneurship. And by the way, both are good outcomes. You learn a lot from failure that you can then take into your next endeavor or your next project, right? Failure is not the worst thing in the world. I'm also not a subscriber like so many other folks that it's like the best thing in the world. I don't think you should start out to try to fail. But it's not the worst thing in the world to fail. You actually learn a lot from that. And so when we were doing BI Startups, no one reading, no one caring, no one even knowing who we are, we were able to throw a lot of things up against the wall and try a million different things, and most of them didn't work. And the advantage we had is because no one cared, we didn't have to talk about them. And we could forget them way easy. We'd immediately forget them and move on. And so as entrepreneurs, my advice to you would be, you are going to miss those days where people didn't care. I miss those days. Silicon Slopes can no longer just launch something and forget about it the next week because people care. And we'd get criticized for it, and there'd be all sorts of different things. So reasons why we couldn't do that. But back then, we could try things, and if it didn't work, the only people who had to forget about it was us. right? And so there's a beauty in that part of the journey. And every entrepreneur has to go through that part of the journey. And I know that that's the it gets harder as you scale, and there's other challenges and things to it, once people start caring and once you've built something of value. But just think about, if any of you are in that phase currently, how lucky you are to be able to be working on something that nobody cares about. I mean that sincerely. Because there's a beauty in that. Try a lot of things to see what works and what doesn't. One of the things I did, and probably a turning point for Beehive startups, was I was on Twitter I still remember, it was like a Friday afternoon. A local Fox 13 News reporter tweeted out a story that said, 15-year-old beekeeper has bees, honey, and bee-making supply equipment stolen by bee rustlers. And I'm all in immediately, just the headline alone. First being, what's a bee rustler? I did a pretty deep dive on that. And bee rustlers are crazy, not to get off on a tangent, but they steal the queen bee, and they steal all these different things, and they make a lot of money, stealing bees. It's crazy. And so as somebody who was running something that nobody cared about, I was actually thinking, well, this is maybe a potential career path if things don't go well. So I looked into bee rustling. And then the second reason, and probably more meaningful reason why this story caught my eye, is there was a 15-year-old kid in the state of Utah who was running a literal beehive startup, and our name was Beehive Startups. And so I felt some sort of kinship and obligation to help this kid out. He had lost about $15,000 worth of honey and bees and bee supply equipment. And so this was the early days of GoFundMe, when I thought, probably naively, that you needed a video to go along with your GoFundMe campaign, because it looked and felt a lot like Kickstarter back then. And so we called up the Studio C guys who run like a sketch comedy troupe or something inside of BYU, and said, hey, we need to do a video. We want to do something funny because there's these bee rustlers. There's this kid running a literal beehive startup. We are Beehive Startups. And we want to help him, get $15,000 so that we can get his money back. And so they agreed to help us. It was a 3-day shoot. We went up and down I-15. We had all of the major kind of like celebrity Utah CEOs appear in this video. And the video is like this kind of funny, quirky, like I blew a horn and the entrepreneur heard it while they were in a meeting or something. They immediately left. They were the only ones who heard it. Because that horn meant an entrepreneur in Utah was in trouble. I don't know. It's kind of like this dumb idea. So the whole time as we're doing this video shoot, we're all just like laughing. We're talking about bee rustlers. We're talking about this kid who's running a literal beehive startup. We're just having like the time of our lives, right? Again, we're in this phase of entrepreneurship at that point where nobody cares. Like I still remember telling my wife, I'm going to spend 3 days making a video about bee rustlers. And she's like, yeah, I don't think this is going to work out. And for whatever reason, the last shoot we did for that video was with the 15-year-old kid and his family. And as soon as we met him and his family, it wasn't funny anymore. As soon as we met him and his family, we realized, hey, $15,000 is how they pay for their mortgage, how they pay for put food on the table, how they pay for school supplies. Like this family had been devastated by these bee rustlers stealing their stuff. And I still remember walking back from that final shoot with, the 4 or 5 other folks who were with us, and we all had like this somber look on our face, like, oh, we actually have to do this. We actually have to get this kid his $15,000 back. It means something what we're doing here. When we at the beginning we did not think it meant much, other than we had this unique connection. And so luckily we did. We got this $15,000 back for the kid through the GoFundMe campaign, and we got a bee making and honey supply equipment company to donate actually everything he lost as well. So he actually came out ahead, which we were really excited about, and I remind him of constantly. And we were feeling really good about that. But what we learned from that experience, when we all popped our head up and looked around, is that we'd created a community around this kid. We'd all locked arms to help a 15-year-old entrepreneur who was in trouble, sure, but to do something that was outside of ourselves. And we looked up and at the end of that week, we were a far stronger community than we were at the beginning. And that was the beginning of something that, I really think that's the turning point for Beehive startups. And that ethos, stays within our organization today, where, the whole idea of like empowering a community to learn, connect, and serve, the magic and secret sauce of that formula is the serve part. Because that's where the community comes. That's where a community is able to lock arms with each other and do something that's so much bigger than themselves. And you build connections with each other that last forever. First time I ever met Aaron Sconner, the CEO of Pluralsight, was in that video. And now we see each other all the time. He helped co-found this organization, and we've done a lot of amazing things since, including the $5 million commitment, and we fed 1 million kids at Silicon Slopes Tech Summit this past one through a partnership with Feeding Children Everywhere. But that ethos has remained with us. But it was also like, because we were in a position at that point in Beehive Startups' journey to do things and try things without anybody really caring. This is a story, I have 500 other Beehive Startup stories that you'll never hear because I don't want you to hear, right? Because they don't end like that, right? And this story could have easily been that as well. But because we were in a position to try things and figure out what it was we were even trying to do as entrepreneurs, some magic happened. So I would say that's a long way of answering your question of embrace the fact that nobody cares about what you're doing when that's the journey you're on. That early stage, you'll miss those days. I miss those days of Beehive Startups, and you will too. And so embrace them and don't let it get to you. We have a real mental health issue within our community, because again, entrepreneurship is really, 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 really hard. It's really, really lonely. There's a lot of rejection in entrepreneurship, and there's a lot of nobody caring in entrepreneurship. And just know, one, you're not alone. There's a community that supports you. And two, you'll miss those days when everything I just said was true, but you were fighting and you were persevering and you were gutting it out. And you'll have stories like the one I just told that'll come out of it. Anyway, yeah.
Just recently in the news, Utah, the state of Utah was listed as #1 in the nation for being business friendly, as well as we have 2 years in a row of being #1 economically. What do you attribute that to, and how do you see that? Are we talent ready here in the state, or what do we attribute that to here in the little state of Utah?
Yeah, so Utah's definitely punching above its weight class. I agree with this idea that we have the best economy in the country. I think it's true. I think in order to understand why that's the case, you've got to go back about 35 years. These communities and these economies do not happen overnight, and a lot of us are standing on the shoulders of entrepreneurs and companies who built something a long time ago. And so if you look back, one of the 4 first spots to ever get the internet was the University of Utah. Utah has this really interesting tech history that I'm not sure a lot of people fully understand. Yeah, and so University of Utah spun out a lot of amazing companies and entrepreneurs. Sure, a lot of them went to Silicon Valley. Like Adobe came out of the University of Utah. John Warnock came and spoke at Silicon Slopes Tech Summit, the founder of Adobe. I would recommend everybody watching his interview on stage and how he did that, and you know how it came out of the University of Utah. Pixar came out of the University of Utah. Atari came out of the University of Utah. Silicon Graphics came out of the University of Utah. So there's this rich history that allows, which starts to form a community, which can then surround entrepreneurs with support. And if you think even more recent history, in the early 90s, 2 of maybe the top 7 tech companies in the world, where were they headquartered? Provo, Utah, in WordPerfect and Novell. The CEO of Novell left Novell to become the CEO of a tiny company called Google. So there is this rich tech history that exists here, and a lot of us still would say we are standing on the shoulders of those companies, of Novell and WordPerfect. And then even more recent history with Josh James and Omniture. Josh, some of you may know Josh, the CEO of Domo. His first company was Omniture. Josh proved that you could get a Silicon Valley exit without living in Silicon Valley. Josh sold his company for $1.8 billion to Adobe in 2009. And I don't know that this community exists in the way that it does had that transaction not happened. I mean, if you go to that point in the mountain, that place where you said, hey, who would ever want to live there? The only reason why it's still not farm fields is Josh James. That Adobe building is basically a monument to Josh and everything that's been created around it, right? And then, this next wave is the companies you all know, and the Pluralsights and the Qualtrics and the Inside Sales and Health Catalyst and Domos of the world. And there's a wave underneath that. And so I think the answer to it is, number one, there is a long history and a community that has been established here in the state of Utah. That's one. 2, we have strong universities in the state, to your point. I think the university talent and just the universities themselves have really helped support this. I don't think we do that without them. And then 3, and this is just maybe my own personal opinion, I bet the other 2 would be more backed up with data and facts. 3, there's this entrepreneurial spirit here that you find other places. I mean, there's great entrepreneurs everywhere in the world. It's not like we have a stranglehold on this idea of entrepreneurship. But Utah was founded because of a belief that one person could change the world, right? I mean, think about how Utah was founded. I mean, we have a belief ingrained in us, like chip on our shoulder. How we even got here probably plays a bit of a role, right? And this idea that one person changed the world, right? Now, some of that's religious, and I don't care about that, but that ethos and that spirit and that, just overall energy exists here in the state in a way that it probably doesn't in other places. And another thing that makes that unique is you would never find an organization like Silicon Slopes, at least I haven't as I've traveled around, in like Silicon Valley or Austin or Kansas City, where think about this, the top entrepreneurs and CEOs in the ecosystem have set their logos and egos at the door, create an organization, walk into a room and say, all right, how do we lift others? You do not see that other places, and I think that plays a role in it as well, and it kind of goes into that kind of entrepreneurial spirit that exists here in the state. Yeah.
I think one of the reasons we see a lot of entrepreneurship here is that many people have the same experience. I hired really high level skills in tech, and they didn't see much opportunity, so they were left with leaving the area or doing something on their own.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, think about how our companies were founded, too. Like, think about the type of companies we build. I said earlier that we're nothing like Silicon Valley. Let me go dig a little bit deeper on that. Our companies that went public this past year didn't take venture capital money or investment for over a decade. That in Silicon Valley, you don't start a company unless you have VC money, right? You walk into one of the many venture funds that they have with a PowerPoint deck, maybe an MVP, but most of them are funded from the very beginning. And so to touch on your point, we bootstrap here. We build real companies here, and we have to focus on profitability from day one. And that's not like that's the better way to do it. That is like out of necessity, because in the early 2000s, there certainly was no venture capital scene in the state of Utah. There kind of hardly is now compared to Silicon Valley, right? Most of our top companies still go to Silicon Valley to raise their money, right? And so it's a different ethos.
I think it's changing, but I think that's one of the big challenges facing our area here, more than up north, is that a lot of talent is being built and it comes and sometimes leaves because we're not locking arms, we're not serving each other to build here.
Yeah, I would call it an opportunity.
Yes.
Hey.
I don't call it, well, I don't say challenge in a negative sense.
No, yeah, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
As part of, on behalf of Dixie State, I guess, my question is really about, as we're looking at majors, different programs and majors that are really beneficial for our students to be able to best prepare them to take on these tech kind of opportunities and create these kind of companies. We're constantly trying to look and see where are things going, and biotech and all of that is a real direction that we see an opportunity with our connection with IHC and whatnot. But what else would you say, like what would you recommend as far as from your perspective, the direction and things that we could be looking at to best prepare, trying to look down the road?
Yeah,
Programs and
yeah. I think going deep on artificial intelligence, training your students around artificial intelligence would be super useful. I think AI will probably take all of our jobs, and so people who know how to program that AI probably be the ones who don't get their job taken. I think things around, if you want just like subjects, I would say like AI and blockchain, and obviously going deep on computer science. But not everybody has to be a developer, not everybody has to be a coder. We need entrepreneurs, and we need marketers and writers and all that. Again, I got a degree from UVU in journalism because I wanted to write, and I didn't even know how that would serve me in my career. I thought that would be a valuable skill to know how to communicate and know how to write long term, and it actually turned out to serve me quite well in the career that I'm on. So I think so that's what I would do. AI is going to be huge. I think the first institution and university in the state of Utah to really have a fantastic AI program is going to win. But outside of like the hard tech stuff, the University of Utah has created this Masters of Business Creation program. I don't know if they've even announced it or if I can talk about it, but
well, now we know.
it's really interesting. What you don't need to pass like everybody has those tests to get in to be like an MBA. You don't have to pass that. The whole degree is building a company, and it kind of feels like Y Combinator. Has anybody ever heard of Y Combinator? It's like Y Combinator inside of a university, surrounded by professors in a community, and with some funding to teach real entrepreneurship. Like the whole thing is like, all right, we're gonna, you're gonna have a team. You're gonna come. The only way to be there is like you have an idea, you have a team. We think it's good, and now we're gonna teach you how to make it successful. And I think that's pretty interesting. That type of hands-on type stuff. So. But I never want, when I get asked that question, I never want to leave out like just basic, like know how to write, know how to communicate, that type of stuff, and the value of that. And I think our institutions are valuable. I'm not one of those tech guys who says college is worthless and you should never attend it or anything like that. So, but yeah.
Could you expand a little bit on the idea or the goal that you guys have on providing computers to all schools by 2020? What's
So we want a computer science course taught in every single school, K through 12, by 2022. No state in the country has done that yet. There are states, who are pushing really hard. I think Pennsylvania's doing a good job, and I believe Virginia's getting close. But we want a computer science class taught in every school. That's what we mean by that. Now, obviously, like a kindergartner, what that class would be versus what that would be for a senior in high school is going to be vastly different. And we're working with an organization called Code.org to implement this program. And that's where a lot of our funds, like we're giving $5 million, the founders of Silicon Slopes, to this effort. A lot of our funds will go towards the type of programming and all that type of stuff. But that's what we mean by that. It's a computer science class in every school.
So the money is to fund faculty or to fund the equipment or?
Faculty and programming would probably be where most of the money goes to.
And it's at the high school level or?
K through 12.
K through 12.
Every school.
Wow.
Yeah, every school. It's. I don't know how we're going to do it still to this day, but we're going to do it.
You mentioned Purple as a tech company. How would you define tech? I mean, I know that sounds like a silly question, but
No, I think that's
how would
fair.
Purple be tech?
I think that's fair. So I guess the easy answer to that, and I think it's probably also the right answer, is every company is probably a tech company at this point. Purple in particular, though, the way they have to, the tech they use to manufacture the mattresses, the tech they use to sell, and the inventory type stuff, we count them. You're right. It's not like their product is not tech like Pluralsight's is or Domo's is or Qualtrics, so it is a bit different. But we'll count anybody if you go public. Yeah.
Considering the move toward AI, we're probably going to see most of the jobs be more in a service type economy or things that don't, like Purple, that don't necessarily match with the tech platform. Things like Simplus, like Ryan West,
Yeah.
stuff like that. And then there's a recent report I just saw today where Utah was ranked as like the 16th most innovative state in the country. Actually dropped from 14 before. So I guess my question is, what do you think we can do to be more innovative in kind of more of a service model, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think a few things there. One, and this kind of goes back to like this idea of like infrastructure and the type of community you want, and growth is happening, so let's think about the type of growth we want. And this is a roundabout way to answer your question, but there's this thing being talked about, I don't know if you've heard, up north called an inland port. You've heard about this? I don't know what an inland port is, right? And I think and I'm not saying it's bad or good, I just don't know what that is. And I think the types of jobs that's going to bring seem like a lot of like trucking jobs and manufacturing jobs, distribution jobs that could be obsolete 10 years from now. You know what I mean? And so is that the best use of our time? I don't know. Like, and these are the questions that I think St. George is going to have to start answering around the type of jobs you want to recruit here and the type of companies you want to build and the type of infrastructure you want to set. And so I think something that Utah could do that would probably bump us up on that list is like start preparing for like autonomous vehicles and start passing legislation that can kind of regulate that in a way and be thinking about that currently right now. I think it'd be awesome if St. George was like one of the first 5G cities. You know what I mean? And thinking about what that means. And so I think that question is going to be around infrastructure, because whether you want those like the AI type of jobs, but you've got to really think about the types of jobs and the type of companies you're going to build, and from an economic development, and if there's any like government leaders or community leaders in the room, the type of economic development you want to pursue, right? And again, this is not a criticism of Inland Port. Inland Port could be maybe the greatest thing that's ever happened to Utah, but from my like very layman understanding, I don't understand why we're solving for manufacturing and trucking jobs in 2019. You know what I mean? Particularly up north where traffic's already insane.
The reason it's so exciting to have this innovation plaza built in unfortunately, nobody cared, and they should have. And to connect that with an experience I had some time ago, I was in Dayton, Ohio, getting some technical training in robotic measurement, and I had a couple extra days, and I went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Without being lengthy, I ran across an engine design that was absolutely incredible, and it still isn't being used, and it was because they couldn't find an entrepreneur or an angel investor that would help them launch.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I want to take more questions. But I can expand on that. Yeah.
Random question. Do you have curriculum developed at all for the K through 12 computer science programs?
So code.org does,
Okay.
and that's who we're partnered with. And so they've developed a lot of that. We're still in we just made that commitment in January, the $5 million commitment. So we still got to figure out where our money's going to go. But the State Board of Education has developed that as well in partnership with code.org. Silicon Slopes will not be the implementer. We'll be the advocate, funder, and hopefully, the folks who hold people accountable for making it happen, if that makes sense.
That curriculum's going up for vote this next year, so I know it's
Okay.
going forward pretty quick. I'm sure the $5 million helped.
Yeah, yeah.
Who's that deal work to do that?
To get the computer science in every Utah school. I think it probably came out of a series of meetings we had with Governor Herbert and his staff. I think Governor Herbert was the first person to say, we want computer science in every Utah school by 2022. Aaron Sconard, who's the CEO of Pluralsight, has been our lead from Silicon Slopes organization. And I think without Aaron, we wouldn't be where we're at today in terms of the progress that's been made. And so I think it's a group of folks within Silicon Slopes and in government, and folks at the legislature, like Speaker Brad Wilson and President Adams and those folks. I don't know where the initial seed came from.
So in that same vein, do you think that Spencer Cox is the best suited person to be our next governor to really forward these initiatives?
I like Spencer. I think he's a good man. I can't endorse candidates.
Where do you see, based on what you've seen in the past over your journey, where do you see Utah in 5 years and in 10 years? How do you see St. George tied into that, and what companies right now are the ones that are going to be the next Domos Pluralsights? I mean, I try to watch some of these. I have a good friend, Cody Broderick, you probably know who he is.
Yeah.
And building these companies that I think can probably scale one day. But what are some of those, and where are you talking to be with? Are there enough, I guess is what I'm asking, that are going to continue the trajectory that's been going on?
Yeah, so there's a few questions in there. I'll answer where do I see Utah for the next 5 to 10 years. Growth is happening whether we want it or not. And so there's no way to stop the growth that we're seeing in this state. And so, our entire focus needs to be around managing it and, preparing our infrastructure and a variety of different things so that we're in a position to accommodate it. And so that is around the things I just mentioned. Particularly up north, this is already something we talk about every single day around housing, transportation, air quality, education, and just overall infrastructure for the growth that we're seeing. Because it's not slowing down, it's not stopping. Even if we have a recession, it's not stopping. All of our, almost 75% of our growth comes from, we have a lot of kids in the state of Utah, right? And so it's not like we're getting a ton of outside people just flocking to Utah. It's almost entirely internal growth, right? And so there's no real way to stop that. Well, there is, but we won't talk about that. And it's not stopping, right? And so how do we prepare for that growth? And, as far as how does St. George tie in, it's interesting. I've never thought St. George didn't tie in. Like we don't think of St. George as not part of Utah or like down south, and you know what I mean. Like we see and celebrate the successes that occur here in St. George, the same way we do up there. You know what I mean? And I think, but you know, more directly, like where is St. George on its journey as a startup and tech ecosystem? I think you're probably like where we were 4 years ago, if I had to guess. You have two really solid companies here that will spawn others, and if they're successful, I think you'll be probably where we are in the next like 4 to 6 years. Yeah.
I just kind of applaud the effort because it reminds me of Irvine 30 years ago. It has that same kind of feel when we were incubating things. We were doing things together. We created companies like, you know, Black Sun, Advanced Logic Research, some other chip manufacturers. We're all combining together and pulling these ideas together because, like you say, as an entrepreneur, it's really lonely out there. You're working away on your project. Nobody else cares about it. You're just locked into what you're doing. You got television. But infrastructure, it's really tough here because I'm looking at what they've already built and how they're going to try to build around it, where BLM land is. And unless they're really building out toward Arizona, I don't see it.
Yeah, I mean all we talk about up north is infrastructure, and I would anticipate within the next couple of years, all you'll talk about is infrastructure.
There you are.
And how do you manage the growth that you're going to be seeing here, and how do you recruit? One interesting thing, you have a lot of advantages that we don't have up north in terms of your ability. Just look around to recruit top level talent here. I made a joke in the other meeting that we have Thanksgiving Point. You know what I mean? We have like a restaurant called Harvest Restaurant. Like that's our recruiting tool. You have Zions and everything that is this magical place to recruit people to. And so people are going to come here, and infrastructure is going to be the whole ball game at some point.
I was at your Ryan Westwood, a longtime friend, and he's the CEO of a company called Simplus. And he had mentioned that he hates bringing in prospective executives, flying them into Salt Lake in the winter because of the inversion.
Yeah.
So I don't see that being solved anytime soon.
Yeah.
So can you do us a favor and just send all the companies down here and we'll take care of them?
Yeah. That question's actually easier to answer than the Spencer Cox one. So thank you for that.
So we probably have time for one more if that question, but I want to be respectful of Clint's time and your time as well.
Just perhaps to hear from your perspective, the vision that you have. You talked about inclusion and diversity.
Yeah, so I think tech ecosystems around the country and around the world struggle with that quite a bit, and I think there's not a single community that I think has solved that problem.
Struggle with what?
Diversity.
And I think the challenges are even more unique and difficult in this state. And things that we've done, we helped launch parity.org so that you have to at least interview one woman for all your open VP or above positions. Partnering really closely with Women Tech Council, promoting things like She Tech, which Women Tech Council puts on, and things like that. But I think it's a real challenge. I don't think there's like a silver bullet there. I think it's a constant and consistent push and drive by all of us to help solve it. But I don't have a great answer there. And I don't know that I've heard a great, here's the silver bullet, 2-sentence answer that's going to solve that problem. It's just hard.
Perhaps education, higher education, women.
Yeah.
minorities.
Yeah, I mean, how you got to get them in the community, right? And you got to make them feel welcoming and equal and involved and all that stuff that makes a career worth having. And I think we're making progress, but we have by no means solved that.
I don't know if you guys recorded the Silicon Slopes Summit. I'm sure that you did, but the Salesforce Chief Diversity Officer spoke on stage. and he probably had, I would recommend going and searching that video and seeing what he said, because I think that could be a guideline for what we
Yeah,
can do.
Silicon Slopes Tech Summit is like, this is probably the #1 issue that was talked about from stage. It's probably the issue we hammer on at most of our events the most, I would say, because we think it's critically important, right? And we know we haven't solved it as a community, and we know that there's a lot of work to do, and we know it's going to take all of us locking arms to help solve it. So, yeah, can we do one more? He's wearing a Silicon Slopes shirt.
I'm good.
Just to add on real quick, for the diversity thing, what's the friction? Because that's really the most important thing to solve the problem is where's the friction of just everyone that's not getting a job like emails, et cetera. Where's that friction?
I think in Utah it's like super unique. I think somebody told me at UVU that it was like a large percentage, it may even been like 50%, but don't quote me on this, of women drop out of college by like their sophomore year because they get married, and it's a very small percentage that actually comes back. And so I think, it's starting at like grade school and like this computer science in every Utah school. Probably the #1 sneaky reason we're trying to get computer science in every Utah school is to introduce that to young girls and women as like a viable career path in something that is for them, right? And so I think what we're dealing with right now is a lot of things that they have been taught and have been experienced prior to them getting to these companies or to being introduced to this community, right? Yeah.
This is a really larger scope comment. I think we live in a really chauvinistic society, worldwide, and we have a long ways to go before women are treated more than men.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of institutional things that I think need to be changed to where, like, I still remember one of the first stories I wrote about on BI startups was when there's like this thing called like pathways when you're like in 7th or 8th grade, right? Where your kids are like, all right, I want to be like a lawyer. So they'll show like, here's all the things you need to do if you want to be a lawyer over the next through your junior high and high school career, right? Or if you want to be like a mechanic or something. There's all these different ones. And there was one for software engineering. And at the top of this pathway like sheet, it's like a PDF or something, or I think they print it out and they hand it to everybody. On the top of it said, non-traditional for females. This was 2013.
Be a flow chart, what you're talking about.
This is like, here's everything you need to do if you want to be a software engineer. But at the top, they put non-traditional for females, right? And so we're bumping into, and that's gone. We made a lot of noise about that, and it's no longer there. But that was 2013, because that was during the early days of BI startups. And so we got a lot of work to do around like, where have we built systems that have pushed out women and minorities at the early level to the point where they get, to a point where they're like, hey, I actually would like to try to tech, or I'd like to actually be a part of this community. But they don't feel welcome, and their life experience tells them they're not welcome. But anyway, thank you all for coming so much. Of course.
I hope you know how lucky you are to have Clint here today. We appreciate him coming down. He's been coming down a lot, too. He toured campus just last month, so we really appreciate him spending time, and really spent the whole time with a lot of different groups today. So if we can give him another round of applause.
Thank you.